My PowerPoint up?
It is.
Not in presenter view though
We're
yet.
seeing the presenter view.
There we go. How's that?
That's perfect. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Ann, and good morning to the committee. I think the question of the day is, what did this pleasant August mean for us for the drought status? We had above normal precip in August and some pleasant temperatures. I think you'll see through my presentation, not much. We didn't do a whole lot with the drought status, and I'll explain why that is. Starting with where we were last month, month of August, pretty much the whole state was in extremely dry, that bright red or dark red categories. A few hanging in there at severely dry in the northwest corner. Moving on now to September, this is the map from just yesterday, looking at the new data in the U.S. Drought Monitor. You see we actually degraded some areas, particularly out east, south of the Missouri River, Macomb, Richland, Dawson, Prairie, Webo, all went to exceptionally dry category. They didn't see much precip in August, and we feel like they were behind from the previous month as well. So we did do some degradation there in the east. We did make one improvement though, Bighorn County down there. Again, August, it was in extremely dry. We've moved it to severely dry. That extends north into Yellowstone County to about Billings or so, and you'll see that in a second on the U.S. Drought Monitor map. Looking at the U.S. Drought Monitor map, you see a little better depiction of the areas and the improvements made there in Bighorn County. You see that up in the northwest, the county map typically takes on the worst category. So those counties like Flathead and Glacier have, we're showing them in D3 extreme drought. But really, that's a pretty small area up there, restricted to the international boundary there with Canada, along Alberta. We made some changes there just to make sure it lined up with conditions across into Canada. Back up just a second here. I don't want to sound too gloom here. There is some good news. I mean, looking at the bottom left corner there at the 90-day standardized precipitation index. So that 90 days, that'd be going back till June. And of course, June is our biggest precip month in Montana. So for August to have made some improvements there says quite a bit. You're seeing a lot of white there. There's normal conditions there, and even seeing some blue up there in the northwest corner. So this map might give you an idea of where we might be headed as we head into fall here. Of course, the Bighorn improvement here, perhaps starting to think about Phillips County in the northwest corner. So this is, I thought this comes from the climate office. This is a normalized difference vegetation index. So it's showing a relative health of vegetation in green versus unhealthy vegetation in brown. So you can see on the 30 days, so the month of August, it was on a greening trend. And if you're here in Helena, you probably saw that. It's looking a little bit green out there. And that's true for a number of areas of the state. Over in Bozeman, Missoula, you saw a little bit of green up going on. But the message here is that, despite that, the graph on the right, the bottom right corner there is the anomaly. So that's this, the last 30 days compared to those same 30 days in the period of record. You can see that still it's less green than usual. So I thought this was pretty telling of, yeah, we did see some benefits from that August precip, some green up going on, but we're still really dry out there and drier than usual for this beginning of September. What are we looking for to start to make improvements? I think there's two big ones, well, three here that I'll mention. We want to start watching the longer term metrics, that 90-day. That's why I was showing the 90-day SPI. We want to start to see movement at those longer ranges, 90 days, 180 days. We also want to keep an eye on soil water content. I'm glad Kelsey's going to be presenting a little bit later today. I've got one of the plots here from their Mesonet stations, the soil water content. So the volume of water contained in the soil. Plotted on the left there. Two things I want to point out on this graph. First, across the bottom, that's just your months, going all the way back to last September, and then your percent volumetric water content is across the top left here. I want to look at last September compared to this year. You see that we are a little bit below still compared to where it was last September. And those numbers aren't big. That's 20% there. But just to see that we're starting off this September with less water content than we did last year. And of course, last year, what really set up this drought was September, October, and how dry it was as we headed into fall and winter. The other thing we're watching for here in September is to start to see this to climb or either kind of level out. And you see that headed into August, it continued to drop. We have seen a little small climb here, and we're waiting to see, does that sustain? Does that stay level, or does it continue to climb? That's what we're hoping to see headed into fall. On the right, you're going to see these graphs in Aaron's presentation. This is a statewide runoff duration hydrograph at 28-day level. Again, we're watching for here in September, is this going to start to level out here and perhaps even start to climb, or is it going to continue to decline? It looks like possibly it's starting to level out. It's at least jumped from this lowest 5th percentile up into the next category here. So you see that typically happens in late September into October. You start to see it level out and climb again. So perhaps we're starting to see some of that. And that's what we want to see, as we're starting to make some decisions on whether or not we should improve drought categories. Looking back at the 2020, so I want to put this slide in here to just set up a reminder of how this year's drought came about. It really did set up all last August, September, October, a very dry fall, dryness headed into winter. You see the August, September, October, we were making degradations, and that's not typical. And I remember mentioning this at the first, back in the fall of last year. Typically, we aren't making degradations as we're heading into September, October. Typically, we're headed the other way and making improvements. August has set us up nicely this year. If we can see some good precipitation in September, October, we may be starting to make some improvements here. Looking now at the drought impact reporter, you see the total number of reports there. 243 received this water year. That's the most we've ever received since this started. On the map, it didn't take, but what I meant to highlight here is the reports received since our last meeting, and all of those are right here in Richland County, Webo, McCone, lining up nicely with our decision to degrade conditions there south of the Missouri River. Again, we don't really use these reports to make determinations on the drought status, but they're a really nice double check, a nice cross check for us. Looking at some of the reports received since our last meeting, so these were just received within the last 30 days. I think Eric, when he presents, he's going to touch on a number of these. They mention the status for crops and harvest is over, and they came in at 20% of normal, 35% of normal. The bottom one there, Richland County, again mentioning dryness throughout the county, and stock ponds are empty. So just that that August precip isn't going to fill those. We're really looking at a reset here for the water year, and what's coming out of fall with spring melt and those sorts of things before those types of impacts start to get improved. And that was it. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those. Also, I'll mention the meeting coming up September 30th with the Drought Monitoring Committee, seeking local input. It's open to anyone. Producers across the state can call in and just describe what conditions are like in their county.
Thanks, Troy. That was great. And I think a good reminder when you're showing all those reports that are coming from Eastern Montana about the value of the local producers really, getting on there and telling us or letting us know what's going on. Are there any questions from the committee members before we move on to the next presentation?
And I just want to follow on to your point and to Troy's point. With that D4 designation in the eastern part of the state, all of the indicators, or the gridded indicators, were pointing towards improvements. And we really realized, due to those impact reports, I was actually looking at the map and thinking things are getting better. But because of those impact reports, I got an email from Troy, from Mike, and Aaron said, key in on this area. We may have missed something in the previous weeks. We did. And if you looked at the longer term gridded indicators, there was an objective reason for degrading to D4. But it can't highlight enough the importance of those impact reports for the technical committee to take a closer look.
Right. Thank you, Kelsey. Good point to make. Okay. Anyone else? Aaron?
Yes, I am ready.
Okay. Troy, if you'll stop sharing your screen. There we go. And I'm assuming, Aaron, you have a PowerPoint you'd like to share.
Let's see.
There we go. And not quite, it's there. Perfect. Thank you.
Whoops. All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me again. So I'm Aaron Peters. I'm the Senior Service Hydrologist for the National Weather Service. I'm based out of the Great Falls office, but I also support the Billings and Glasgow offices. And I'll just jump right in. So unfortunately, the meeting this month is a little bit early for the official climate rankings. So those are not in yet for August. So if we have a meeting in October, I'll present those in October. I am interested to see how they turn out because of the precipitation we got in August. But it's interesting looking at these graphics here on a water year scale. Even though we did have above average precipitation and some areas had below normal temperatures in August, it didn't really tilt, the water year much. So this graphic here, temperature rankings for the water year since October 1 last year, really looks no different than it did last month. The entire state pretty much has been in the top 33% for temperature or warmer, except a couple. That one area in Beaverhead County has been a little bit below normal, and a few areas kind of in that normal range, but mostly above normal, which is no surprise to anyone here. Looking at August, it was statewide, generally speaking, it was kind of in that normal range, so in the middle third. Some areas certainly below normal, and then that area in northwest Montana was the one spot that kind of remained in the top third for temperature ranking. As far as actual departure, you can see a little more detail here. So the northeast counties and then that kind of south central part of the state were several degrees below normal for August, which is certainly beneficial when we're talking about evapotranspiration. And then the northwest corner there was above normal, like the previous graphic showed. Looking at water year precipitation, we are seeing some improvement. We did see some improvements here from the August precip, and that area in Flathead County has kind of remained above normal and started to creep into above normal for the water year scale. Also, what's a little bit interesting to me, I'm not sure what's going on with Liberty and Teton County there, because we've got a lot of reports of pretty dry conditions in southern Liberty County or Toole County, and that might just be that the precipitation came at the wrong time and still had major agricultural impacts, but it's showing as the top 33% for the water year in precipitation. And of course, we are seeing some improvement, as Troy kind of mentioned, down that south central part of the state as well. Now looking at August, now keep in mind, August statewide precipitation average is 1.3 inches, which is certainly not our lowest precipitation month. Those usually occur in the winter, but August is also not one of our highest precipitation months. So being above normal, just keep that in mind, that it doesn't take as much to be above normal when your normal is lower. But that being said, it was a very good August precipitation-wise, particularly for the fires and smoke. We've seen a drastic reduction in fire activity across much of the state. Our incident meteorologists that are deployed on fires across the state have repeatedly mentioned how beneficial and how kind of, what a good break August was for fires. Of course, the agricultural impacts weren't improved at all when you talk about August precipitation, but certainly had some benefits. And as you can see, it's a pretty green map across much of the state. So we're in the top 33% for almost all counties, except for those ones in the east. And then we're, getting even into the wetter categories, and a couple of blobs there of record wettest August. So definitely, I think, and I believe Livingston, in fact, so you look there at Park County, there's a couple blobs there of record wettest. And I believe Livingston, Montana was record wettest for August. Looking at the anomaly, so this is just percent of normal. And again, our normal is 1.3 inches, so just keep that in mind as you're looking at this. But much of the south central part of the state is 200 to 300% of normal for August. And then looking at the northwest part, so that northwest corner was warm for August, but they were also wet. So of course, if you've got the precip, the warmth doesn't impact quite so much. But really, the only part of the state that was below normal for August precipitation, again, was that eastern, northeastern corner, and then the southeastern corner counties, and then part of Beaverhead County there. Looking at the soil moisture statistics from the USDA, this just came out this morning. So last month we were at 99%. Excuse me. Last month we were at 99% at this time. So we have seen some improvement to soil moisture, but not much. And as you can see, that +4 below the 93%, that means that in the last week, we've actually gotten worse. So a week ago, we were at 89%, and now we're at 93%, again, because we haven't seen the precip for a couple of weeks now, and it's really starting to dry out again. And this kind of goes back to what Troy mentioned, how, we really didn't improve drought conditions much at all with that August precipitation, because the soil was so dry already that any precipitation that fell was, was used up pretty quickly, soaked in, and was not enough to actually really meaningfully improve, a lot of soil moisture stuff. And that kind of is reflective in this graphic again. All right, looking ahead to the ENSO forecast, we're still looking at a pretty good chance of a La Nina developing for the winter. And these statistics and percentages, probabilities have continued to get higher. We're close near 70% now for the November, December, January timeframe. So kind of see how that plays out. But this has just been, getting more confident as we went along through the late summer and fall. I'm going to share this. This is, just take this with a grain of salt, but I thought it was interesting. This map was produced by a guy at the National Weather Service in Alaska. He produces all sorts of maps like this for many different things. It's pretty cool. He's a pretty cool statistician that kind of analyzes all sorts of stuff. But he tweeted this out the other day, and this is the number of times the second back-to-back La Nina winter was wetter than normal. So most of you probably know that we had a La Nina last winter that didn't really pan out as far as precipitation sometimes does with La Nina. But we are looking at a back-to-back second La Nina in a row now this winter. And so out of the 15 back-to-back La Ninas that we've had, you can see there that many counties in Montana end up with a greater than, a pretty good number of out of that 15 that were above normal for precipitation. So particularly in the west and in the southern part, so a lot of the mountainous areas. So again, this is what's happened in the past and is not necessarily what's going to happen in the future, but it's giving me a little bit of encouragement, because maybe we'll see some mountain snowpack, which is what we really need to, bust that hydrologic drought that we're in. And so anyway, just thought it was interesting and thought I would share, because it's kind of a cool map to look at. Excuse me. All right, for the 3-month outlook. So this is September, October, November. The precipitation outlook on the left has really gone unchanged in the last month. We're looking at that kind of third of the state in the southeast that is looking at a above normal chance for below normal precipitation. And then the rest of the state kind of maybe equal chances of all. And then that temperature outlook, again, didn't really change much in the last month for this time frame, but the kind of lower half of the state is looking at a possibility of above normal temperatures for the September, October, November timeframe. Looking at winter, so this is not the official NOAA winter outlook, which will come out this fall, but they do have different lead times for these 3-month outlooks that you can look at. And so I was looking through them this morning. And again, this is a long ways out, and this is a pretty big time frame to look at from the beginning of September. But we are looking at for the December, January, February timeframe, hopefully above normal chances for precipitation for that winter time frame for much of the state. So it gets, of course, greater chances as you move to the northwest, and lesser chances as you move to the southeast. But overall, much of the state may see above normal precipitation. So I'm hoping for that, taking this as a light at the end of the tunnel maybe, and holding on to hope that maybe we'll have a good winter. Temperature wise, nothing too one way or the other for that time frame so far. Looking at the 8 to 14 day outlook. So this is valid September 15th to the 21st. So starting on day 8 from now and the next that next week, the middle of September. Nothing too rosy looking, kind of pretty much below normal for precipitation and above normal for temperatures, particularly in the eastern part of the state, which of course is where the drought, some of the worst drought is. So that's not encouraging in the short term, but that's kind of what we're looking at. In the 7-day precipitation forecast, though, there are some pretty decent chances of precipitation for the kind of western half of the state. That northwest corner, of course, as you can see, has the greatest chance for some higher amounts, but even onto the plains, east of the divide, might see a decent chance of a tenth or even a quarter of an inch by the end of the week. So, and by the way, most of this precipitation that you're seeing in this QPF graphic is in that later 6 to 7 day time frame. So we're talking the end of the week, early next week. But we'll take anything we can get, I guess. So that's at least it's not all white, and I'm taking that as some encouragement that maybe we'll see some rainfall across portions of the state. So that's all I've got. Any questions for me?
Thank you, Aaron. Committee members, does anyone have a question for Aaron? We all feeling a little more hopeful? I like that. I'm
cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, curious about that prediction on having back-to-back La Niñas and maybe a little more moisture this week.
I hope so. Yeah, we'll see.
Okay.
Just a quick comment on Troy and Aaron's presentations, I guess. So the one kind of bright spot that we're seeing, or positive reports we're seeing, is you can see on the drought map, so Teton County, where that moderate drought pocket is, that's the one area where we've had some reports of average to slightly above average yields and crop quality. So that's the one highlight that we've heard in crop condition reports is in that bubble of a moderate drought in the triangle. And then, like Troy mentioned, everything else, yields are down 30 to 70%. So just that one highlight is that bubble in Teton County.
Thanks for that. It's kind of interesting because that bubble is, right over the Greenfields Irrigation District, almost. And so it's almost, and of course that has nothing to do with that, but it's very interesting because they seem to be doing okay in that area. Overall, which is and it just continues that Shoto for even in July, that Shoto area would get thunderstorms once a week, and they were getting like a half inch and then an inch and then 3/4 of an inch, and so everybody in that area is probably wondering what the rest of the state is talking about,
what they're doing there to encourage that. Yeah. No doubt. Okay, so I think maybe we'll go ahead and move on to stream flow. And this morning we have Aaron Fiaschetti from the USGS share his knowledge about our stream flow. I'm assuming you have a presentation, Aaron. Okay.
I do. Share that with you. Okay. Is that presentation up?
It is. It looks great. Thank you.
All right. So good morning, everyone. Just wanted to provide an update from our end at the USGS, and I'll just get right into it. So here's a current look at stream flow conditions. The green is a normal flow, 25 to the 75th percentile, and we're seeing quite a bit of that, and it seems to line up pretty well with the lower drought categories that we're seeing. It pretty good improvement in flows over what we had seen and talked about last month, as in July we're kind of approaching some record lows that were set in the Dust Bowl area. So overall an improvement in flows, but we still have quite a bit of below normal to much below normal, and we're still setting some low flow records for the day in a few sites, particularly in southwest Montana currently. So the trends in stream flows here that we're showing, only 93 sites. We have 240 sites, so we're only showing sites with 30 years of record or no missing data. You can see the benefit of the August rain here, that we increase the amount of sites that were normal and decrease the amount of sites that were below normal or dry. But without continued precipitation, we're seeing that volume of below normal to much below normal sites increase. But the very low, where we're setting a daily record or a 7-day record, has decreased quite a bit from what we were seeing previously in the last 45 days. And one thing to note, we do have a few sites that are much above or above normal, which is good to see. So just kind of a comparison, taking a longer view of stream flows, looking at a 28-day average stream flow. We have what was presented last month on the left here, July 13th to August 10th. A lot of red, a lot of orange, not a lot of green. And over here on the right is the most current 28-day average. And you can see that kind of highlighted area of with the purple is where we're still seeing pretty low, below normal, much below normal flows, southwest Montana, upper Missouri, and the Yellowstone Basin. And we just have one site showing here at that 28-day average is the Ruby River below reservoir, which is a record low for that period. And that's 58 years of record there, so pretty significant period of record. So just to jump around at a couple sites, just to highlight the summary to date. Here we are up at the Yak River near Troy. The dotted line is the period of record average, black dotted line. The blue is 2021. You can see kind of starting in January, we've been below that period of record average. And if you hop over to just looking at the runoff season, this is percent of average in here, and just seeing that we're kind of hanging around that 50 to 60% of average or less. July is pretty low here, 30 to 40% of average. So much below average here in northwest Montana on the Yak River. Coming over to the Yellowstone at Sydney, pretty similar. The much below the daily hydrograph has been pretty well below that period of record average. Pretty big drop here in July and August, where we're not even close to where we should be for runoff conditions. And one thing to note here is for July, about 20% of the average flow, so really, really low. Everything is much below for that period on that bar graph. Moving over to the Gallatin near Gateway, things look a little bit better here. We did have a bit of a peak that was above the average here in June, but the hydrograph fell off pretty quickly after that peak. And you know, some better flows, that 75%, a little bit better into 80 percentile or 80% of average in May, but it's still well below average. And then hopping over to the Clark Fork near Missoula, and just to highlight, that's one spot where we did have above average flows here in April and May, which is always a benefit, but we did drop off quite a bit into June and July. So some pretty low flows during that period, but things have tended to look better over on the Clark Fork for most of the summer. And just to highlight a little bit, we don't always talk a lot about the water temperature data that we do collect. We collect quite a bit of it. The period of record isn't terribly long on a lot of it, but just to show a couple sites here and how water temperature is starting to decrease quite a bit here. This is showing a plot of the max, average, and mean daily temperatures at the Blackfoot River near Bonner. And just for a point of reference, the 71-degree drought trigger that the Blackfoot Challenge has there, and just showing that, you know, after August, the stream temperatures have decreased quite a bit and have stayed down, which is always a benefit. And then just kind of hopping over to the Yellowstone at Corwin Springs, we see a pretty similar trend. And just to put in the 73-degree hoot owl restriction temperature for a point of reference on how high temperatures got, but we're seeing that temperatures have decreased quite a bit and have stayed low, even with hopefully with the hot weather that we're going to get in the next day or two. So just a quick takeaway, August flows continue to be low across the state, not as low as what we had seen in July, which was very, very low. The rain in August increased flows almost statewide. Without the continued precipitation, flows have decreased, and as always, this is just a quick snapshot of a few places in a big state. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. I mean, that sounds hopeful as well, you know, that things are beginning to look a little bit better. Okay, and then if I can get you to stop sharing your screen, Aaron. There we go.
Let me just figure that out. Somehow my,
okay.
Or if you, somehow that got disappeared. Let me see.
Okay.
Oh, here it is.
There you go. Okay, so any questions from the committee for Aaron, or any comments?
Yeah, I'll just make one comment, Aaron. I mean, I saw that you highlighted that record low at Ruby Reservoir, and I was up there last week, and I've never seen the reservoir that low from all my times making trips up to the upper Ruby there. So yeah, it was pretty stunning to see that.
Yeah, it seems like flows on the Ruby have been quite low for quite a bit of time here. So, been a tough year there.
Right.
I guess I have a general question for all the previous speakers and upcoming speakers. When you look at the data we have in order to assess current drought conditions, kind of midway through the season, early on in the season, antecedent conditions, for each of you guys, do we have the data necessary to affect real-time management, to affect people on the ground? Is our SWE network sufficient? Do we have it sufficient gauging? I guess just wanted, I know the answer is no, but I guess I would like to hear your guys' perspective on where are our data limitations in order to predict drought, call drought mid-season, and affect change on the ground, and hear a little bit more about your thoughts on that as we look into our drought plan and as we're looking towards the future. Because we have an opportunity to potentially make recommendations in our drought plan, and I'd like to hear from you guys, what are we lacking and what do we need? Or is it perfect?
I'll chime in quickly. I think we could spend a week talking about that fantastic question, Anna. I think, we have a variety of models and gridded indicators that work well for capturing kind of meteorological and agricultural drought onsets. I think those indices are very dependent upon measurements on the ground from station data. I think the SNOTEL network is a fantastic one. Arguably it'd be great to have more sites in the mountains. There's a paucity of measurements when it comes to central and eastern portions of the state and snowpack and soil moisture. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but the gridded indicators and data, the models are only as good as the station data from which they're derived. And then there's just differences, right? Drought is a nefarious entity in that there are different forms of drought and the impacts are felt across various sectors. And so there's the objective data that we use to assess drought conditions, but there are also different forms of drought and the impacts associated with them. They have different timescales and they affect people differently in various geographies across the state. So I guess the point there is it's a complicated process. We have to think about going into a drought and also the timescales at which we come out of a drought. I think one of the things that the monitoring subcommittee talked about, and Mike was great at kind of putting this meeting together, was that the impacts of this drought are going to be felt for months, and the impacts are here to stay. We can't come out of this drought too rapidly based upon meteorological indicators, but we need to ensure that there's soil moisture and groundwater recharge, that stream flows come back to normal. And I think Troy put it well, that in some cases is going to be a seasonal reset. It's not until the snow flies and melts next spring that we potentially restore those conditions.
Aaron Peters, did you have something you wanted to add? I see you're off mute.
Oh, I was just gonna say, where do we start? Kind of like Kelsey, but I will just briefly, like hydrologically speaking, and I'm sure Aaron Piachetti would echo this, that anytime we see funding cut for a stream gauge, it's devastating for monitoring, not only monitoring, but predicting hydrologic drought. And that's something that it kind of lags behind some of the other indicators and is sometimes harder to categorize until we see that. And so if we don't have the gauging network to assess what's going on, it's you can't assess hydrologic drought almost at all. And so we often see, threats to funding for gauges come across from the USGS, and oftentimes they get picked up, but sometimes they don't, and we're really kind of losing some stations. And that's all I really wanted to say, was that we just need more and to hang on to what we've got critically. So
Great point. Thank you, Aaron. And I think even Aaron Piachetti, when you're talking about the data that you presented, you had the caveat about sites where you had continuous data or no gaps, and I think that's another important piece for us to be considering.
Yeah, it's important to have our sites with you need a reasonable period of record to start taking a good look at the data. And I guess we could argue about what that period of record should be, but it's important to hang on and take a look at gauges that might be in danger, that have a period of record that's important, and more funding and gauging is always good.
Yeah, one last thing, I'll just quickly chime in. I would say, I think one thing that would really help us, and this would be in a perfect world, would be mid to mid-low elevation snowpack measurements. The SNOTEL network is fantastic. and super useful and super valuable. But I think what we're going to be increasingly kind of relying on models to tell us is how our mid to low elevation snowpack is doing. There's just less coverage at those elevation bands, and those are some of the critical locations that are going to be increasingly impacted by rising temperatures and changes to springtime climate. So I just thought I'd throw that out there.
And I'll add on to that. I completely agree, and I think that was something that got us this year. We had pretty much 100% snowpack percentiles in the high elevations. Look from the NRCS, and so it kind of painted a rosier picture than was reality. And once runoff began, we realized there wasn't that low to mid elevation snowpack, so we were solely relying on this high elevation snowpack, which is not going to sustain the system. And so that was something that was very evident, in particular this year.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that's, like you were saying, part of the attribution to why we had such a rapid decline of high flows after peak hydrograph kind of runoff. And I'm not saying that the only way to get at this is with measurements. I think it helps a lot, but we are, as a group, starting to use these physics-based snow models, things like SNODAS, to try to approximate those mid-elevation snow distributions. And that's going to be increasingly important, but more measurements are always better.
Thanks, Zach. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to make just a slight change in the agenda then, and I have, since we have Kelsey and we're having this discussion about measurement, Kelsey, I'm thinking, and Eric, if that's okay with you, to switch and move Kelsey up to right now to talk to us about Mesonet and the drought dashboard and sort of what's going on with that.
That's fine.
That would work. Okay, thank you. All right, Kelsey, then why don't we go ahead and continue this conversation about measuring and monitoring.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
We can, but it's not quite the present. There you go.
Okay, well, I think you guys just covered the introductions to this, which is good because I tend to be long-winded on my introductions. I decided not to talk about the Upper Missouri River Basin Drought Indicators Dashboard. I think that's a topic of conversation for a later time. Hence to say we've, across the monitoring subcommittee and over time, developed a dashboard for our weekly assessments of drought, and it's based upon kind of a consensus and over time science-based assessments of various models and gridded indicators that we can use to map drought conditions on a weekly basis. And what I would add to that, though, and related to this conversation, if I can progress, right? When we think about monitoring these conditions, this is a slide I love to show. When we think about managing our water resources for seasonal, annual, or decadal changes in drought, floods, fire, and water supply, you name it, we have at our fingertips, in some cases, a mix of ground-based weather information, soil moisture information, snow information. We have the ability to couple that with models and satellite data and large-scale atmospheric data, ultimately to pull that information together to assess, in some cases, local conditions. And we have to fuse that data and information to better characterize drought conditions, rapid onset droughts, say early in the summer, and their impacts progressing into the summertime. I'm not going to go into detail in terms of modeling approaches and indices that are currently used, but suffice to say, one of the key uncertainties in those estimates across Montana is our ability to measure and monitor soil moisture on the ground and other weather variables, things like snowpack and snow depth. So today I'm really going to talk about the Montana Mesonet as a means for filling in data gaps, especially in central and eastern Montana in our range and agricultural lands. And I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but this group recognizes the importance for our monitoring of drought conditions as well as flood early warning and predictions. So we began the Mesonet in about 2016, and I'll highlight that it's a partnership. It's not just the Montana Climate Office that's developing the Mesonet. This is a partnership across many state agencies and federal entities like NOAA. I'll show a slide related to that in a second. But really the goal of the Montana Mesonet is for improved knowledge of moisture conditions, importantly, soil moisture for modeling of flood potential. All of these sites are collecting data right currently at 10-minute intervals. That data is conveyed to NOAA and the River Forecast Centers, the National Weather Service, as well as the Army Corps of Engineers and the Reservoir Management Team. So this real-time data is available to federal and state entities that are responsible for both drought and flood monitoring. And as well, it's publicly available. So we made the decision early on that this would be a public network, even though it's not all of it is supported publicly, but this data would be free and accessible to the public. So it's being used for timing amounts of reservoir releases to mitigate downstream flooding. There's also significant potential for drought and fire monitoring. So we have improved knowledge of soil and fuel moisture conditions. And over time, we're working to develop tools and decision support tools that allow us to assess soil moisture conditions in various parts of the state so we can better understand when we're going into a drought, and importantly, when those drought conditions have reset and our soil water supplies have increased. So these are key indicators and locations for triggering both state and federal emergency response. And importantly, I'll highlight again that all the data from these stations is being fed into and used to bias correct models and gridded indicators that provide a more comprehensive picture of conditions across the state. And I'm moving through this pretty quickly. I've given this talk at this meeting before, but what I want to show you guys is a map of our current Montana Mesonet. We're up to 84 stations, and some of these date back to 2016. And again, these stations are a mix of partnerships and ownerships across and supported by NOAA and the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration and their National Mesonet program. The BLM is supporting a large portion of these sites, the Forest Service, importantly, the Montana Department of Agriculture. A lot of these sites have been co-located with the Department of Ag's groundwater monitoring well program. And so we're also collecting groundwater data. And I could go on and on, many watershed groups, and importantly, a lot of private landowners who see the value and importance of this information. So this is, and I'm moving through this quickly, guys, but I wanted to highlight this is kind of where we stand in terms of the current Montana Mesonet. I'll also point out that the data and it is available, and it's available at 10-minute intervals. And I have to thank Zach Hoylman for developing this web-based application, but you can visit this site here and you can click on any one of these points and access data and information from each of the stations on precipitation totals. Zach has recently coded a estimate of reference evapotranspiration. So when we talk about rainfall events, say late in the summer, that are small relative to the evapotranspiration or water leaving the soil, these are locations where we can begin to estimate how much effective precipitation has actually occurred. In a lot of the events that we saw this August, even in some cases, we received upwards of 1 inch of rainfall in certain locations. I was out in Ingomar, Montana, when a rainfall event happened. The PET, or potential evapotranspiration, for 2 days in a row exceeded those precipitation amounts. And importantly, when you took a shovel and dug a miniature soil pit, that moisture didn't get anywhere past about 2 inches in the soil profile. So most of it evaporated. PET is an important estimate to understand how much effective precipitation occurs. Anyway, we also are measuring solar radiation, soil temperature, soil water content at multiple depths, wind speeds, wind directions, and other typical weather variables. But importantly, we can begin to put those together for estimates and models of other indicators. This data is all publicly available. You can now download it. There's an additional site where you can download the entire historical record for each station, and that can be subsumed into hourly intervals, daily intervals, or averages across time. And you can do that for all of the data variables. It's updated every 10 minutes, and this data is also being ingested by NOAA's MADIS system, the Meteorological Assimilation Data Ingest System. That's just a good acronym to say early in the morning, but that makes this available to federal entities that use this for day-to-day weather predictions as well as river forecasts. Okay, getting to what I really wanted to talk about today, and I'm excited to kind of present this to the group. In terms of expansions and improvements to infrastructure, and Anna, getting back to your point, there's a paucity, even with the existing kind of Mesonet that's been developed, there's still a paucity of measurements in terms of soil moisture and snowpack measurements in central and eastern Montana. And this has been recognized for some time. There have been multiple federally convened committees to discuss improvements in our monitoring capabilities, and especially in the context of the upper Missouri River Basin, in which Montana is a key partner. We form the headwaters of the Missouri, and when conditions get wet in Montana, folks in North Dakota, South Dakota, and Nebraska are looking upstream to understand what Montana's conditions are. And I'm blocking my screen here. Sorry. This project, we were recently awarded a $21 million contract with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And this was based out of North Dakota and South Dakota, convened by Senator Rounds and Thune. And it's Senate Bill 4444, the Missouri River Basin Drought and Snowpack Monitoring Act. In total, there will be 540 stations installed within the upper Missouri River Basin at elevations less than 5,500 feet. Again, in the Missouri River Basin, but in Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Nebraska. Because Montana is the headwaters in such an extensive land area of the Missouri River Basin, for Montana, that means we're going to receive about 220 stations, and this is meant to happen in the next 5 years. So I've shown a picture here of what these stations look like. It kind of looks like the Mars rover, but it's a larger version of the typical RAWS station that you might see the U.S. Forest Service operating. But again, your standard weather measurements, wind speed and direction, relative humidity and temperature at 10-meter heights, as well as at 2-meter heights. So we can look at kind of boundary layer coupling to the local atmosphere or the near surface atmosphere. These will also be measuring snowpack, snow water equivalent eventually. Right now, they are just instrumented to monitor snow depth. We do have a mass weighing scale or pluviometer that will be recording precipitation in its various phases. So that's shown on the left-hand side of this image. And then importantly, within the soil pits, we'll be measuring soil water content at 5 depths as well as soil temperature. So 220 of these will be distributed, and I'm going to show a map in a second, but just to give you an idea of the progress of this project, it's starting, as all projects, more slowly than we had anticipated. We installed a pilot station in Bozeman in 2020. This year we've been busy and driving across the state and trying to stay out of the smoke and the heat, which is hard to do in eastern Montana. But we've completed the installation of 10 stations, and those are indicated. I have to move my image here again. Those are indicated by the green circles on this map. So this is again a map of the grid that we'll be laying these stations out in. So every one of these squares will receive a station over the next 5 years. The blue or the green dots here represent the 10 stations that we've installed this summer. And these were based upon existing partnerships and retrofits of our existing AgriMet sites or new partners that we're excited to have a station. This process is happening slowly in terms of the installations, because we also have to do NEPA clearances and 106B cultural clearances. So there are contractors that are doing that a year prior to our actual installations, but we're moving forward quickly. This upcoming year, we'll be doing 8 stations, and then the following year, we'll ramp up. The Corps just received a significant amount of funding to add additional stations. So in 2023, we're slated to complete 35 stations. Right now, we've been reaching out to landowners and watershed groups. Key partnership that I'll highlight is with Laura Nolan and the Mussel Shell Watershed Group. 15 of those stations will go in the Mussel Shell watershed. And one of our goals here is to partner with watershed groups, but to instrument in a watershed context as we build these out and make sure that local groups and stakeholders see value in this information. So, and then in 2024, really what I wanted to say in this meeting today is we'll be looking for new partnerships. So here's just a quick image of the larger basin and the grid network that we're laying these out in. I've listed a link to an app that Zach Hoyman's developed, but the screening process for siting these individual stations is based upon representative analysis of soils conducted by the NRCS, land use and climate conditions that we're analyzing, so that we ensure that these stations are representative of the average conditions within a grid cell. And there's variability across the basin. So each site is going to undergo a full soils analysis by the NRCS as well. I'm going to stop there, and I feel like I'm going long already, but I'm happy to answer any questions if I have time.
All right. Thank you, Kelsey. That is pretty exciting to hear about the grant and the number of new stations that you're going to be putting in. Quick question that I have before we go to the committee for any questions. How should people just contact you if there are any watershed groups or landowners that are on the call now or that people know? Should they just reach out to you specifically to say they're interested in some site consideration?
This is where we need some organization. Just speaking for myself, I'm happy to have them reach out to me or Kevin Hyde, my Mesonet manager. But really and importantly, we're looking for kind of leaders within the community that can act as a conduit to work with local landowners and as well state entities that are interested in hosting these sites. But to help us with that kind of boots on the ground, we all know Montana is a big site and there's lots of travel required in this process. And so initially there's a bit of e-scouting involved based upon climate information, soils maps, et cetera. But ultimately we have to visit these sites, have a cup of coffee with a landowner and sign land use agreements and easements so we can access these sites. And so it typically, the thought is to work with leaders of local watershed groups that can help us reach out and find landowners who are interested.
Great, thank you. So committee members, does anyone have a question or any comments for Kelsey?
This is Ian. I would just say, I appreciate the partnership, and it makes a lot of sense for us to co-locate Mesonet sites with our groundwater monitoring sites. So I think that's been a great partnership with Brett and his group. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you guys for Brett. He's been amazing.
Awesome. Good data collection sites. So thinking about this and moving on, not from our the scientific data and all the things that we've been hearing, but I'm pleased that we have Eric Summers here today to talk to us about kind of the impacts that they are hearing about in terms of agriculture and agricultural statistics. So Eric, there we go. He's already on the screen share.
Good morning.
Good morning. I think you want to go to the presenter. There you go. Perfect. Thank you.
All right. So I'm Eric Summer. I'm the state statistician for USDA NASS. Thanks for letting me join you today and present. So we'll get into this. So currently we're collecting the September small grains summary, and so we're going to see how bad things really are. Right now, I'm going to share with you what we had August 1. And so we're anticipating for winter wheats 52.7 million bushels, which is the lowest production that we've had since 2002. Yield forecasted at 31 bushels, which is the lowest since 2002, which was 28 bushels an acre. So winter wheat losses are pretty devastating for the state. Spring wheat, we're anticipating 51 million bushels. It's the lowest production since 2017, and we're anticipating a yield around that 20 bushels an acre, which is pretty horrendous. Durham wheat, we're looking at 11.6 million bushels. That's lowest since 2011. 18 bushels an acre, and if we realize that, it would be lowest since 2017. Barley, we're anticipating at 21.4 million bushels, and again, it's lowest since 1988, which we had 24 bushels an acre. So pretty bleak. Alfalfa hay, we're anticipating 2.5 million tons harvested, which is a yield of 1.4 tons an acre, and as you can see, 1.2 tons in 1935. It's pretty bad. Okay, for other hay, we're anticipating 1.07 million tons of hay harvested, and that's the lowest since 1988 as far as the yield. All right, so what that tells us is we have 1.5 million tons less of alfalfa than we did a year ago, 660,000 tons less of other hay than a year ago, which is a total 2.25 million tons less hay than a year ago. So that means we're trucking in hay, and we're probably reducing cattle herd and sheep herd numbers. We're definitely shipping earlier. So it's very concerning. And you know, we've all the other speakers have already talked about how the August rains didn't really, I mean, they help, but they didn't help this year's crop in a lot of ways. You know, the hay would have been one of the crops that would benefit from the late rain, but a lot of the hay was down, so that doesn't help with quality issues, and so that kind of messes people up when you start getting those late season rains. So as of this week, that ended September 5th, we had a warm and dry weather week. Harvest is proceeding ahead of last year and the 5-year average. Sheep and cattle are being moved early due to the conditions. So one of the previous slides talked about our topsoil moisture and how we've changed in the last week. If you look at this week, we're at 54% very short and 39% short in topsoil moisture. You know, our typical 5-year average, you can get your short and very short to add up to our very short for this year. So, and you notice that we don't have any surplus in the state right now. So that's very concerning. And then when you go down and you look at subsoil, which is even more concerning, producers are very concerned about the very short moisture levels there. So this is where we are as far as the harvest goes right now. Like I said, we're almost done with barley. We're almost done with spring wheat, and everything else is just kind of plugging along. A lot of places we're ahead of the 5-year average because we have had nice August weather, and they've been able to get in the fields and get things done. The cattle and sheep movements are up quite a bit. You see the 5-year average. Normally, we're not even thinking about moving them yet on a 5-year basis. So it's kind of concerning. All right, so then we move along and we look at the conditions. Corn is an irrigated crop, so it looks better than most of our crops had this year because most of it's under irrigation. Pasture and range conditions are, very, very, they're, in the very poor for the majority, over 80% of the pasture and range is in poor to very poor. And sugar beets is also an irrigated crop, so you can see that there is a little bit of degradation there from where we normally have some excellent. This year we're not seeing any excellent. Okay, so winter wheat harvest is complete. Spring small grain harvest is over 90% complete. Durham wheat harvest is 80% complete. Second cutting hay is over 9% complete, and soil and range conditions are down from last year and the 5-year average. Our upcoming reports, and the September small grains and the grain stocks report are very important right now because this is the final report of the year. So we'll see how bad or how good things rebounded in August, but September 30th is the day. All right, and there's my contact information. And hopefully I feel like I sped through it, but I wanted to leave everybody enough time to get through their presentations as well.
Thank you, Eric. I think that's helpful, and it sort of is coming along with what we're hearing about conditions on the ground. I'm wondering about, of course, my concern is the barley, malting barley. No. Do we have many areas of the state that actually are getting, or that we anticipate might get a third cutting of hay or alfalfa?
There's some areas that might get a third cutting, but with the dry conditions, a lot of the hay areas are relying upon irrigation to get that third cutting. So you might. The barley is kind of a concerning crop in itself because not only did we have the drought and the grasshopper concerns, the little bit of rain that we got was during harvest, so we've had some reports of sprouting. So they kind of have gotten the gamut of problems this year, which usually you get one or the other, not all three. and so, it's going to be a heavy insurance year, heavy government payments and programs year. So that's kind of concerning.
Yeah. We have questions or comments from the committee? Anyone have any thoughts, things that you want to share on that? Thanks, Eric.
All right.
I
Thank
think
you.
As long as we're staying cheerful, John Monzi is joining us again today to talk to us about our current fire status and update. And I heard this morning that even our weather last week was it was good, but it wasn't quite a fire ending season or fire ending event. So John, do you want to give us a little update on where things are?
Yes, good morning, everybody. John Monzi, Acting Chief Fire Protection Program, DNRC. Let me get my screen showing here. Let's see, hopefully, let's see.
There we go.
All right. Let's hope it's a PDF format, so let's hope my down page works. But this was provided to me by our predictive services meteorologist, Mike Richmond. This photo is Silver Run Plateau. It's in the Gallatin Custer National Forest south of Red Lodge, and very high elevation, but very dry. Just to give you a little situational perspective, to date, nationally, we're in a preparedness level of 5. That's the highest that we go. Currently, though, down here, or I should say up in the Northern Rockies, which is Montana, Northern Idaho, North Dakota, and a little piece of South Dakota, we're in a preparedness level for fire of 2, and that's basically due to the precip we received in August. But to date, just in Montana, we have had 2,215 fires, and we burned 852,722 acres. In comparison to just last year, and the total fires numbers are a little skewed because the one I'll give you for last year was a total for the whole year 2,400 fires, where again, might surprise people, but we respond to fires 12 months a year. So we still have quite a bit of fire season ahead of us. But what is important to note, remember I said we burned over 850,000 acres to date. Well, last year for the total season, we only burned 370,000 acres. So that's very indicative to what effect the drought has had and to wildland fire as a whole. And another little metric is to date, we've spent in the neighborhood of right around $50 million trying to suppress fires. And so that we certainly have not had a lack of effort to suppress fires, but you can see by the total acres, the fuels have been very resistant to our suppression efforts. So in all, it's been a very long fire season. We started in mid-June. So let me jump through a few slides here. As always, my down arrow isn't working, so I'll just manually do it. So again, a big effect on precip. Most of the areas, this is sort of redundant to what everybody has said, but most of the areas certainly have not seen a lot of precip, and we're seeing that effect. You look here, our 30-day, this shows you what happened in August. And the problem is it took the edge off of fire season, but it did not take us out of fire season. And then importantly here, and this has been brought forth by other folks, our soil moisture conditions are real low, as you can see on the slide to the left. And what that means to the wildland fire world is our live fuel moistures for the vegetation are real low. And when that happens, of course, they're very receptive to ignition and very resistant to suppression efforts. We've had a benefit up till recently in the west side of the state in our heavy timber types. The north aspects, the east aspects have not been real volatile, but now as we move into fall, that vegetation cures out from the frost, and it'll add to being very receptive to fire. What Mike's pointing out here, one of the big effects of creating these high temperatures and droughty conditions was this high pressure area that settled in. And whenever that happens to us, it settles on the four corners. We end up with really high temperatures and no precip, and then occasional thunderstorms, which cause a lot of lightning. So definitely it's been a very hot, dry summer and not a lot of precip until what we received in August. Of course, this did give away, and we did end up with it being pushed further south, and we got that little bit of cooler temperatures, which was very welcomed, and just that little bit of moisture in August. Like I said, that took the edge off and put us where we're at as far as our fire season at this point. But again, you can see that this change did not do a significant effect on the overall drought conditions. We have a lot of those dry pockets down in this country, the south, what I'll call southwest, and then the southern part of the state. And we are seeing a lot of fire activity in those areas. As I mentioned, we've burned a lot of acreage as compared to previous years. And even with that moisture, we basically, to date, have doubled the acres burned compared to last year. So expected conditions through looking into September, unfortunately, we're going to have out in the western part of the state, west of the Continental Divide, below average precip. The temperatures will be warmer. And then as we move to central and eastern Montana, near average temperatures and average precip. But the problem with that is, as all of you know, average temperatures in eastern Montana are high this time of year, and precip is almost zero. We usually don't expect much at all. Then looking at these conditions, as I spoke about the southern part of the state from west to east, we are going to see the warmer temperatures and certainly the drier conditions. None of that's good news. And then a little redundant here, but yes, we do have significant drought throughout the state, and it's definitely contributing to our wildfire. You look at the southwest part of the state, currently today there are some federal fires that have actually burned together. And with the wind conditions today, we're going to have a lot of fire activity in that area, and that could cause some problems for us even today. So getting to what you all really want to know about, what's our prediction for fire potential? Well, the month of September, as you can see in the southern part of the state, we're going to be above average potential. The rest of the state will be average. Unfortunately, if we don't continue to receive more moisture, average conditions could be a fairly active time for wildland fire in the month of September. We have open burning that is now taking place. We have a lot more recreation with the hunters and folks wanting to get out and grab that last piece of summer, which contribute to the human cost. Hopefully, and I can't really say this will happen, but usually we get out into September. One of the benefits is we have a lot less lightning occur. And I'm really looking forward to that being something that happens throughout the month of September. So again, this was produced by our predictive services. Michael Richmond put this together, and unfortunately, I do not have an over optimistic point of view about the month of September. But the good news is the August precip took the edge off, and we definitely are seeing a lower activity in wildland fire. I'm hoping that continues. Any questions?
Thank you, John. That seems like pretty good news. Any questions from the committee? One question that I have is, how do we, we said we're at a preparedness level of 5 still now. What kinds of conditions bring us back down, and how do we determine when we're no longer at 5?
Well, again, that was nationally. So a lot of that contribution nationally is based on California, Oregon, and Washington. Us in the state of Montana, we're at a preparedness level of 2. And again, that was brought about by the little bit of moisture we received in August. I'm hoping we stay there. And again, it was that precip, but we easily could bump up to preparedness level 3 or 4 if we get a lot more fire activity. We do expect more fire activity east of the Continental Divide and possibly west, though I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we stay in preparedness level 2.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from anyone? All right, then I am excited to have Valerie Kurth with us again this morning, and today she's going to give us some more details. We've been hearing a lot about drought conditions, but I think as you guys have been hearing, we're getting ready to launch into our drought plan update, and hopefully that takes us to places where we can be thinking about what we're doing about this. So Valerie, go ahead. You're not there. Perfect. Thank you. Valerie, you're on mute still. There you go.
How's that?
There, now we hear you.
Everything lining up? All right. All right, thank you, Anne, and thank you everyone for sticking around for this update on the state drought planning process. As many of you know or may remember, the last time the state approved a drought plan was in 1995. So obviously this update is needed, but I think that the drought conditions from this year really underscore and make it all the more critical that we put planning at all levels, so local, regional, and statewide, really put it at the front of people's minds. So I'll be kicking things off with a broad overview of the planning process, and this means starting with the goals of the plan update. All right, so the first goal is to just generally improve and expand our drought preparedness and the related processes that go with that. And for example, we have a really great drought monitoring process. It's very collaborative and very progressive, but it hasn't been formally documented into a plan before. So part of this will be documenting processes like the drought monitoring into a formal plan. And the reason this is important is this will provide a really good foundation for moving forward. Basically, what we want this plan to do is to really get us at the level we need to be at so that future drought plan updates are not quite as daunting and maybe overwhelming as this one kind of feels like it is right now. And what I'm also referring to is there are 6 elements that are widely considered to be essential to any drought plan. And I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about them today in the interest of time, but I will assure everyone that if you are interested in and engaged in the planning process, there will be lots of opportunities to learn more about those elements. And then the second goal is to really evaluate and summarize our water supply information. And this really goes for the past, the present, and the future. It's really important that we document and really understand drought impacts from the past, because this allows us to interpret the changes over time. And then obviously we need to know about current water availability and supply and hydrologic patterns, because it provides important context for planning. And then we also need future conditions, and especially the uncertainty related to climate conditions, because this is what allows us to really assess the vulnerabilities that we have and then develop appropriate adaptation strategies. And then stakeholders. We really want stakeholders to take a leading role in this drought planning effort. And engaging stakeholders is really important because it builds trust and it increases awareness about drought and drought planning. It also ensures that we have a broad range of perspectives represented in the plan. And what we hope that this will do is increase overall buy-in in the plan and ultimately help us create a more actionable and practical plan. And what ultimately we're hoping for is that this plan, by providing the framework and providing some tools for drought planning, that we will be able to catalyze local drought planning efforts through the development of the state plan. And then For fourth, we need to really take a comprehensive look at all of our drought-related processes and the entities that are responsible for them. And this is to ensure that we're being efficient and that we're meeting all of the needs on the ground the best that we can. And then finally, recommendations, possibly the most important one here. As we all know, drought permeates all aspects of our lives. There's numerous direct and indirect effects of drought, and it affects our economy, our environment, our health, all different things and at all different scales. So it's really critical that we think proactively about implementing policies and programs that can help reduce or mitigate the impacts of these future droughts. And effectively what I'm talking about is building statewide drought resilience through this planning effort. And just to review the funding for this effort, we have $100,000 from the 2019 legislature, and then we received a grant from the Bureau of Reclamation for $200,000. And the total budget for this effort is $400,000, and this includes in-kind staff time from DNRC. And then explaining the planning process, to me, it feels a bit like a puzzle. And I'm imagining it will feel that way to you as well. And so to try to alleviate some of this, I made this diagram that really shows the different planning components on the left and how they fit together. And then on the right, I will show you the different plan elements that these components will be leading to. So starting with DNRC planning section, that is me and my colleagues, and we will be leading the plan development and the coordination. And then we have the drought task force, and the membership of the task force will be comprised of the agency representatives that are currently serving on DWSAC. And the purpose of the task force is really twofold. So Reclamation actually has a requirement that for the grant, we have to have a planning task force. But this is for having like a larger body overseeing the drought planning process. But I think this is going to be actually a really powerful way to connect to agencies, especially for developing the response and the operational and administrative framework for the plan. So I think it'll be really good to have this leadership serving as a conduit to their agencies and playing a really strong role in developing those two elements of the plan. And then we will be working with a variety of regional stakeholders. These are people from around the state who represent various water use sectors, and they can provide a lot of insight onto local impacts of drought and adaptation strategies. These stakeholders will be participating in regional meetings and potentially one-on-one interviews. And the information we gain from these stakeholders will directly feed into our vulnerability assessment and the adaptation strategies. And then we're working with a variety of contractors on developing this plan, including someone who will be facilitating our task force meetings and the regional stakeholder meetings. And then we will contract with someone for some of the writing of the plan, and then have contractors help with the monitoring, the vulnerability assessment, the response, and the operational and administrative framework. And you'll notice if you're on the task force that whoever is contracting on those latter two elements will be working directly with the task force on those two elements, so that those two kind of go together. And then we will be encouraging and welcoming public input throughout the planning process and also on the draft plan. And then on kind of a more informal level, we have a range of technical advisors who will be helping provide technical guidance on an as-needed basis throughout plan development. And so ultimately, all of building all of these elements will lead into a final plan that meets all of the goals. I'm not going to read them all today again because I just went through them, but I will show you the bottom here. I have a really general timeline of the planning process. You'll see we are already in September of 2021, And so very soon we will be kicking off the task force and the stakeholder group meetings. And then we're working on the contracting right now. And we're also developing a website. And this will be great because it will serve not only as a central hub of communications for like task force members and stakeholders and contractors, but it will also have a lot of educational tools about drought for the general public. Then we will be broadly working on the development of the plan components and then aiming for around 2023 to have the draft plan ready for comments. So in the short term, the immediate next steps, there will be the kickoff meeting for the task force on September 21st. And those of you who are serving our DWSAC members on the task force, you should keep an eye out for an email invitation from Sean Johnson, who will be facilitating that meeting. And then we will have the first regional stakeholder group meeting on October 14th. And that's all I have about it, unless there are questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Valerie. I think that's a great overview of what our plan is or how we're going to roll this out. Committee members, do you guys, anyone have questions about that? Comments from anyone specifically? Does that seem clear to everyone and what we're going to do or how we're rolling this out? Well, Valerie, you wowed them.
Or something.
Yeah, well, we're all excited, and we are going to be reaching out to as many people as we can to solicit names for these regional stakeholder meetings. So be watching for emails from the planners on that front as well. Okay. So I think next on our agenda, we have discussions, questions, and updates from the committee. I don't know if you guys want me to call on each of you or if you'd just like to volunteer if you have something, an update that you'd like to provide specifically. Ian, maybe I'll start with you. Just check in with you, see if you have anything you wanted to share.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything beyond kind of what Eric summarized for crop updates and what we've already talked about. But yeah, definitely at the tail end of harvest and yields and production way down. I think one of the headline numbers that I had heard was that U.S. barley production as a whole will be at the lowest level since like 1900 or something ridiculous like that. So I think most of the ag stuff has been covered already.
Okay. Great, thank you. Stephen Begley, did I see that you had your hand up? You were ready to give us something?
Yeah, just I'd give you a brief update from for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Okay. So we had the one favorable thing that occurred, obviously in August. We had some cooler and wetter weather patterns, as has been already discussed, which really provided some relief to the fishery in many places. And so we had a number of the restrictions and closures that we had in place had been lifted as those conditions improved. There's still a number of closures in place in the Big Hole River. A number of river sections are still closed. Red Rock Creek, Upper Red Rock Lake to Hell Roaring Creek is closed as well, full closure. We did implement the drought plan in the Blackfoot River. I know that was one area where folks were optimistic and hopeful that the Blackfoot, at least early on, seemed to be a stream that was doing rather well. We did start to see, creep up in temperatures there, as highlighted by Aaron Pachetti's presentation. On August 11th or around August 11th, they actually created there was a base rating shift that the USGS put in place. So that shift, made flows drop a little bit, and went below the 700 CFS level on August 11th. That is where the drought committee recommended that the drought plan be implemented. FWP had responded by sending out 101 call letters to owners of 73 water rights who are junior to FWP's Murphy right, but who do not and are not enrolled in a drought plan. And so we did have that response. That committee is still monitoring conditions, and flows are still dropping there in the Blackfoot. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. As far as what we have coming, upcoming, hunting, we're encouraging those who are about to head out in the field and hunt, that there may be drought and fire related restrictions for access at block management areas. We do keep track of those closures, and I'll provide a link here that provides some information to hunters who are interested in going out. We're encouraging hunters to be fire aware, avoid areas, dry grass and median, use caution in parking in areas with dry vegetation, report smoke or any signs of fire to local officials, and carry a fire extinguisher, water bucket or shovel to quickly put out any potential fires. And with drought, there's a likelihood of interactions with bears. We're also encouraging hunters to be bear aware, and otherwise be careful. As John had highlighted in his presentation, the fire danger still poses a bit of a risk out there. So we're asking folks to be careful and be mindful of that. That's my update.
I'm on mute. Mike Honeycutt, did you have something to share with us from Board of Livestock?
Just to say the activity I reported last time we met continues. We did have a presentation from the proprietor of the Billings Livestock Service and public auction yards in Billings during a recent board meeting. Continued reports of seeing heifers, even bred heifers, being sold into breeding channels, bulls coming to market, being pulled off the landscape. So, a lot of signals of a reduction in the cow herd in that area of Montana. He was reporting that he expected to see a 30 to 40% reduction in the cow herd, in eastern Montana, which is congruent with what we're seeing going through the markets. And so, as I've said before, the thing that it's great to see the positive news in regards to changing conditions, but probably what we've experienced in the livestock industry is going to be a 5 to 10 year pullout because of what the conditions we've seen this year, and then compounded by what happened in some previous years as well. But it's not just us, so here's my positive end. It's not just us. It's cow herd reduction across the entire U.S. A lot of heifers going into slaughter channels and being slaughtered at plants, seeing increases in that in USDA numbers. Everybody's dealing with what we're dealing with, at least on this half of the country in most of the major cattle producing states. And the other point of good news is the markets do continue to remain strong. So those people who are looking at drawing down their cow numbers, are finding bids and finding good bids for those animals. So it's not, so at least it's not a compounding issue of needing to get animals off the landscape and having nowhere to sell them, or having to sell them at a price point that is really damaging to their overall operation. So that's the report in livestock. I wish it was a little better, but we'll be dealing with the effects of this economically for several years in our area.
Thank you, Mike. Do we have any other DWSAC members who had a report, an agency report or something they'd like to share with us? We did have Galen Steffens was on for a bit, but she had to jump off, and she sent me a quick note saying that for DEQ, they have been seeing some impacts to the this field season monitoring due to low flows, and anecdotal reports from our volunteer monitoring programs that some drainages dried up early, so they weren't able to monitor. So that's what we're seeing in terms of DEQ. I don't know, I haven't checked recently where they are with their harmful algal blooms and how many reports we had of that, but there is a website that you can visit if you just Google that, if anyone was interested in that. Director Castor, do you have something you'd like to share, anything with DNRC?
Thanks, Ann. I do not. I think we had a pretty robust showing on all of the touch points where DNRC is involved here. And Valerie, really appreciate your presentation. Looking forward to this effort moving forward.
That sounds great. One item for the committee, I think before we move on, I do not have the October meeting scheduled yet. And as you just heard from Valerie, we have the Drought Task Force meeting scheduled for September 21st. So I guess wondering if the committee has thoughts on scheduling that meeting in October and when might be most convenient if we would like to have that. Sometimes we have a meeting in October, sometimes not, but now that we're moving into the drought planning process, I'm not sure if we wanted to do a full DWSAC report out meeting. Anyone have any thoughts on that or opinions? You don't have to share them with me right now or share them with the committee, but I just wanted to get some general idea. Or if there are conditions that we'd like to be watching for, if you'd like to have another report out in October. Okay, well, we can give that some consideration and watch for an email from me if you think that we're going to have, that you'd like to have another meeting. Do we have any, next on the agenda, we have public comment. And so is there anyone who has been listening in or participating that would like to share something with the rest of the group that's on the meeting? Any public comments, you can just go ahead and unmute yourself. I can't quite see the full screen, so, and all the people that are on here. Okay, I'm going to say thank you very much, everyone who has joined us this morning. This has been recorded, so we'll post the recording on our drought, our DNRC drought website, as well as copies of the presentations if there's some information or some of the slides that you'd like to go back and take a look. And we look forward to seeing more of you during our drought planning process coming up. So thank you. Director Castor, anything else?
No, thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you to all of our presenters. Bye-bye.
Thank you.